Hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Folks, it's turning cold. We had, got dumped on here about a foot of snow, which is not that unusual for this part of the country. I mean, they were talking snow Mageddon and stuff. It's winter. Hell, it's going to snow. It did snow here. It's going to get really cold, 15 below zero here within the next week or so. So I got all of the winter merch on, my little turtleneck and flannel and all that kind of stuff from the winter time, and you need it. Let me a couple of things here I want to get to right off the top. A couple of late breaking news stories, and both of them are kind of shocking. Now, this first one is you hear me talk about the 2020 world that we live in all the time on Podcast by George. What that means is, for those that are just joining, maybe haven't seen the explanation on that, but we could be dead in 20 years from climate. We're going to be talking about climate a little bit on the show today with our esteemed guest, Dr. Politics, Steffen W. Schmidt. That's 20 years with climate. With nuclear war, with an accidental or purposeful nuclear strike, it could be 20 minutes. Okay, look at this. This just came across the transom this morning. Taiwan's defense ministry mistranslates an alert, erroneously saying China launched a missile. What? Yeah, Taipei, Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry mistranslated an alert into English on Tuesday, saying China had launched a missile instead of a satellite and urging caution days before the island's elections. Again, this is from Associated Press. Taiwan holds presidential and parliamentary elections on Saturday that China has described as a choice between war and peace. So these elections are coming up. The bilingual alert sent to residents' mobile phones cautioned in English that there was a missile flyover. The defense ministry later issued a statement apologizing to the public for the faulty English translation and clarifying that China had launched a rocket carrying a satellite and not a missile. But of course, you got to read between the lines, read every word here and think about it, folks. The people that were getting these alerts in Taiwan on their phones in English, guess who they are? They're the ones that are most dialed into this conflict, maybe those that are most on the side of armed conflict. They get this alert that a missile has been launched by China and it's going across Taiwan. Oh my God, the alerts went off in the middle of an international news conference by Taiwanese Foreign Minister Joseph Wu. He clarified it was a satellite launch, told journalists not to worry, and proceeded with the news conference. Quote, "We need to stay responsible. We need to stay moderate in order to prevent a conflict from happening between Taiwan and China." Dude, eat your own cooking is what I would tell him. I mean, they're not staying moderate. They're not being responsible at all with these issues. And that is of risk to all of us when it comes to the potential for a 2020 situation. Okay, we got Doc Politics in the wing here. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about these things. Here's the other thing. Now, you'll see this all over the web. I hope that you do anyway, because this is really revealing. This is a security camera. Again, this is from Associated Press. This is not from an extreme left platform or podcast by George or anything like that. This is from the Associated Press. Some young men in Gaza standing on the street with their hands in their pockets, and an Israeli sniper opens fire. Look at this.
ما شفنا الا هالجندي في قناص ما شفت الا هو اول ما بلش طخ اخوي خلص جيت درمح بدي اساعده اللي هو اجى طخخني والشهيد بكى لحقني وراي في نفس اللحظة قنصنا الجندي.
I'll play it again. The most horrific part of that, and again, it's a massive reveal as to what's going on. I mean, you've been hearing all of these differing accounts. That's unjustifiable, folks. Whoever is doing that is pissing down your back and telling you it's raining if they're saying they're not doing these types of things. This is caught on video, and the most horrific part of it is the young man trying to go to the aid of the person that's been shot and drag him off of the street, and he gets shot. Yeah, horrific. That's not accident, folks. That is by design. Okay, that's our opener. And we maybe can talk about that too. And I want to encourage everybody that's joining us. You have a comment, you have a question on anything, bring it up on screen, text it in there, because our guest today is well equipped to talk about anything that you want to talk about. It's Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt. He earned a PhD in public law and government from Columbia University, New York. He's a founding and sustaining member of LULAC, Council 307 in Iowa, one of the oldest Hispanic community and leadership organizations. He also served as the chair of the Iowa Governor's Spanish-Speaking Commission, later named the Department of Latino Affairs. He was born and grew up in Colombia. He's the author or co-author of 10 books, and I've got the book. I just don't have it up today. I might hold it up here later. American Government and Politics Today. It's in its 20th edition, I think. He's the author of many articles and columns on Latin America, U.S. issues, cyber threats, the politics of disruption, and women in politics, a frequent political commentator of American and international media all over the world. He's the recipient of the Iowa Governor's Volunteer Award for work with the Latino community and former chair of the Iowa Governor's Spanish-Speaking Commission. He is the Lucan Endowed Professor Emeritus now of Political Science at Iowa State University. So let's take that off screen, click a couple of buttons here, and say good morning to our good pal, our good buddy here, Dr. Politics. Hi, Steffen.
Good morning.
Hey, thanks for coming on in here. Okay, I'm going to talk about the caucuses here right off the top. Now, a lot of people, Doc, they want to know what's going on behind the scenes with Podcast by George, how I put this all together. And I did this little film clip, just kind of a behind the scenes look at me putting together a show on the Iowa caucuses. Here it is. Oh, God! No!
That should be on YouTube, because people will use it for all the things that people suddenly are panicked or angry or frightened about. That's great. Yeah, that's the caucuses. Complex this year, more complicated than ever. Always interesting, and I'm sorry, but I am a big supporter. I love the caucuses. I think people coming together and talking about why they're supporting different candidates is so much better than the basically anomic, where people just go down and pull a lever on a ballot at a polling place or at a voting place and then go home. I like it, and it doesn't hurt democracy. The Democrats are totally wrong that the Iowa caucuses are racist because Iowa is too white. We at LULAC have made every 4 years an enormous effort to get Latino voters to their caucuses, which often are very close to their homes, to provide someone to pick them up and drive them if they don't have a vehicle or if they're elderly or whatever. We have Black, Latino, Asian, American Indian, Native American, and obviously a whole variety of different immigrants from Africa, immigrants from Vietnam, a huge number of immigrants from Sudan. And these idiots, I'm sorry, of the Democratic National Committee off in Washington, D.C., they have no idea. They think Iowa is all white and it's like South Africa.
Yeah.
With
well, that's part of the, yeah.
That is going to hurt the Democratic Party if they treat us like that. No wonder Iowa voters are swinging, over to the Republican side, because we don't like to be treated that way.
And I mentioned off the top here that
go that in that direction.
Yeah, and I mean your commentary, your visage in print and in electronic media has been all over the world for the last 50 years, including this. Now, this lays it out pretty well. I'm going to bring this up on screen here. This is an article in The Conversation. It's updated for this year. And this is a good example of what you're talking about here, covering many of those same topics. How the Iowa caucuses became the major challenge of U.S. presidential campaigns. It's a little backdrop for us. And I got to say right off the top, I looked at this photo that they chose to stick in. I don't get it. I mean, this guy's obviously at a Trump rally. You can look and you can see the Trump thing in the background. And this guy's turned to Jesus, and Jesus, I can't read the other thing, but obviously very fundamentalist here. evangelical at a Trump rally. This guy, I don't get Trump. I never have understood why these people want to follow him. He may be the most ungodly person, I mean, unreligious person that's ever ran for president, or one of them anyway. It says the first and most visible test of Republican candidate support in the 2024 presidential election in the Iowa caucuses, which take place on January 15th, 2024. January 15th. We're coming up on that. We're just 5 days away. This year, even though Democrat Joe Biden is not facing a serious challenger for renomination. Okay, I wanted to clarify that a little bit, because he's not facing serious challenge for renomination in the Democratic Party. Is he facing a serious challenge? Well, yeah, from the Republicans, and maybe even somewhat because of independents that are running. But Biden is the de facto nominee for 2024 in the Democratic Party, at least at this point, Doc.
Yeah. The Democratic National Committee has said, we don't want anyone challenging Joe Biden in the caucuses or in the primaries. He is the guy that we want to be re-nominated, running, and then, beat the Republicans. And it makes sort of sense, but you don't do it that way. You don't do it by taking away the right of Iowans to express themselves. Maybe there are a few people in the Democratic Party who have different ideas of how the party should maneuver through all the problems we face, and let Iowa caucus goers express that. Of course, there are no caucuses where you actually converse about presidential nominations this year, because the brilliant Democratic National Committee and the lapdog poodle Iowa Democrats went along with doing away with those caucuses. So now people are going to have to write a name on a ballot or check a name on a ballot and mail it in terms of who they want. And I guess I don't understand. Nobody has explained to me if that ballot that the Democratic Party is going to make available is going to have other names on it. Is it going to be possible for Democrats, when they send in the ballot, to put down, somebody else? So we've been shut down. The New Hampshire Democrats, whom I know very well as I know Iowa Democrats, they said no. They said, we are not going to allow the Democratic National Committee to shut down the New Hampshire primary, first in the nation primary. That is in our laws. And so they're going to try to basically hold a primary in New Hampshire against the orders from the Gestapo of the Democratic Party in Washington. So I thought that was a better idea. And I thought the Democrats in Iowa should have done the same and said to the Democratic National Committee, I'm sorry, we're not going to have you tell us which app to use to report the results of caucuses, for example, which is the last time the DNC dictated to the Iowa Democratic Party, and it blew up terribly. We are smart, we are experienced, we know much more about politics than the DNC. And so we should say, look, this is how we do things in Iowa. You don't like it, fine. You don't want to seat the delegates that are selected by the Iowa Democratic Party if we go ahead and have caucuses, fine. We don't care. It's more important for us to exercise that tradition that we have. And we're going to go out and try to make it possible for people to come to the caucuses, whether there's a blizzard or not, which is what we've done for the past 45 years. And
I'm glad
blizzards to caucuses many times.
Yeah, and December 15th is the date for the Iowa caucuses. The Republicans will be doing it like they always do, and then the Democrats have this new form that they're talking about. And South Carolina is February 3rd, 2024. It says there, and I'm glad you brought up that app. I don't want to forget that in 2020. That was the most significant part of that Iowa caucus situation. Buttigieg looking like he was going to lose to Bernie. Maybe the other thing that was significant about it was Bernie finally defiling himself and dropping out and supporting, the Democratic nominee in 2020. And then in 2016, there's an element or something that I know you haven't forgotten, and I'm trying not to forget as well. I remember all the Republicans running around in 2016 saying Hillary Hillary Clinton should not be on the ballot. My God, she is under FBI investigation. They're considering possible charges against Hillary Clinton. There's no way she should even get consideration. Yeah, and now they're all running to back Trump, who's facing 81 or 91 indictments or something like that, actual charges. They got no problem with that when it comes to their game, when it comes to Donald Trump. I mean, my God, if that doesn't tell you what you need to know, I don't know what does. Now, I wanted to get to this because a lot of people are unaware of the tradition. I got a question for you on this. The Iowa caucus has become a tradition because the media devotes so much attention to the candidates' activities in Iowa and then to how they perform on caucus night, you write. Criticisms have emerged. Iowa's small and mostly white population, as you mentioned, has subjected the caucus to the charge that it is not representative of the nation as whole. There's also concern that caucuses are difficult events to participate in because voters must attend personally and at night. You mentioned they've trudged through blizzards to do this in the past. In 2020, there was renewed debate about how Americans should select their candidates for presidents. Caucuses are now generally in disfavor, with many states moving to primaries. Okay, and I was reading this article, a couple of things. Iowa's not the only caucus. Nevada, North Dakota, Wyoming have caucuses. Do they caucus like Iowans do? Did they get that model from us, or do you know anything about their caucuses?
Sure. That developed over time when the Democrats decided they wanted to bypass the smoke-filled room where powerful politicians and leaders pick the candidate of the party. And the only reason Iowa is first is because we're smarter and we got our stuff in early at the beginning of the whole caucus season process. And we were the first to hold a presidential preference caucus. So we're first in the nation on caucuses. All the other states have been told to do away with their caucuses. And I guess they're going to do that. Don't forget, every party holds caucuses every year and every 4 years for sure to do business. They get together, the party leaders and precincts get together and talk about campaign strategies for the future and raising money and other things like that. So caucuses have been around for a long time.
Well, let me ask you this. This is the question now when it comes to caucuses. Now, you've seen them all. You've been around. Yeah, I talk about the fact when I was at Drake University, I could have interviewed anybody that I wanted to that was running for president at the time when the first caucus. Right. Jimmy Carter was there. I didn't even interview him. I interviewed Mo Udall instead. I mean, that shows you how wrong I was. But going back to your experience with these caucuses, and you talked about how they tried to get away from the smoke-filled room. Okay, Chicago. 1968, the Democratic National Convention. What a mess, man. I mean, look it up in the history books if you're not old enough to remember it. But it kind of looks to me, Doc, like the Democrats got together and decided, we don't want these young people rioting in the streets to stop the Vietnam War, which they were correct in doing, I believe. We don't want these thugs running amok during these smoke-filled parlors, these conventions, these primaries. We're going to move this thing from that to the parlor of our primary demographic, which is old women. Little old ladies are going to host caucuses, and that's the way that we'll decide our presidential nominees starting in Iowa. And it will be done peacefully. And I don't know, to me, it looks like they probably wanted to maintain the status quo and not have this upheaval, particularly violent upheaval like Chicago in 1968. Now, am I way off base on that, do you think?
Oh, no. I mean, look, no political party, no organization is going to take kindly if a gigantic number of people suddenly burst in on your meeting and start waving placards and start shouting and using megaphones and disrupting the process. I mean, there is, it's not surprising, is it, that the Democrats, who had a convention, and the conventions of the parties are people who have been elected at the state level and are sent to that convention as delegates. It's not 5 guys with cigars who are picking the candidate. It's a huge, huge number of people at the convention. Some of them are supporting Bernie Sanders. Some of them are supporting Hillary Clinton, some Obama. And at the convention, they can work it out. Often the conventions themselves, without the Vietnam protesters, are raucous events because these delegates are passionate about their candidate. Ladies and gentlemen, the patriotic state of beans and corn of Iowa nominates so-and-so as the candidate for president. And if you look back in history, some of the conventions were almost as disrupted without protesters from Vietnam coming in. So the conventions to me were always a lot of fun. People dress up, they put on they have funny clothes, they march around, and it's a real grassroots thing, whether it's caucuses or primaries. The conventions are a meeting of politically highly active people, and that's democracy. They don't have that in Venezuela. They don't have conventions in North Vietnam. If they have a convention, it's a bunch of people all dressed in the same clothes saying, yes, sir, to Rocket Boy, Rocket Man. So I like the conventions. I think they're fantastic. I've covered the Democratic Convention in Boston for CNN and Espanol. And it's magnificent. I heard Barack Obama give his speech at that convention, which was just a speech from the Illinois delegation, and the African-American delegate from Chicago sitting next to me said, that guy is going to be president someday. Whoa, he did become president. So it's a place of great political yeast rising and all kinds of ideas floating around. We should not forget that politics is not statistics. It's not polls. It's not cut and dry. It's emotional, and it is very, very important. And every country should have it. Russia doesn't have it. China doesn't have it. North Vietnam doesn't have it. Cuba, Venezuela, they don't have that. What they have is a tightly controlled, ideologically led. And by the way, my friends and some of Bernie Sanders supporters who love the Cuban regime should know that Cubans are fleeing Cuba right now, 60 years after the Marxist Revolution, in huge numbers and in tiny little boats that they make out of trash lumber. So, those socialist governments, they may sell a good story about how wonderful they are, but if you live there, for the most part, you may want to get out. So let's just remember that.
Okay, well, I would say my socialist and left-wing fans or friends they would say that we've had those sanctions and embargo on Cuba for all these many years, and so life is kind of miserable there, particularly if you need medicine and stuff for a sick kid. Okay, I want to get to this because we're running out of time. We only have an hour with the doc, and we're already 20 minutes in. I put these URLs up on screen where you can follow his work now, including Substack. And this comes to what we were talking about. This is some of the most recent postings you have. The Iowa Caucus, still number one. Remember, the evangelical voters view this election as a cultural and moral war, not a choice of little policies here and there. Some people view these elections as a joke, and we're going to have a little something on that coming up as well. But the evangelicals don't. I thought this was a very significant statement that you made here, Doc, and I'm reminded of it all the time by my wife, who used to be listening to Christian radio in particular, and she's always told me, George, you don't know what's really going on out there with this huge evangelical population and the situation with Donald Trump and the right wing, and you kind of laid it out here very simply in this statement.
Yeah. Look, George, you got to remember, evangelicals do have very specific reasons why they support the candidates that they do. They supported Governor Huckabee at one time in the caucuses, and he won the Iowa caucuses. They supported several very conservative candidates for president, including Senator Santorum, who won the Iowa caucuses a different year for president. And you got to look into what their sensibilities are. Why are they supporting the people that they support? And they have reasons for it. You may not agree with their reasons. They, in turn, sure don't agree with the reasons why you support the candidates that you support. And politics is all about essentially disagreement. That's what politics is about, disagreement, which is not allowed in countries like China and Russia. And disagreement results in people taking different positions, and hopefully those disagreements are settled peacefully without violence. I mean, that's the only thing that we have to be concerned about, is if those disagreements can be settled in the Iowa caucuses on caucus night, on election night next November, and people basically behave themselves, accept the results of elections, which in the United States, every study that was done, every investigation that was done, even by Republicans, showed that the last presidential election, there were a couple of little glitches in a few places, but there was no conspiracy to steal the election and to basically make Biden president, even though he lost the election. And we have to understand that in politics, there are winners and losers. And the losers, hopefully it's the same in sports. If you lose a game, you can complain about the referees, and you can complain about the coach, and you can complain about the venues. But if you lose a game, you should not take up arms against the other team. You should say, we got to play better next time. And that's pretty much what I think most Americans would like to see happen. Go out there, play hard, try to make your case. And if you lose in the end, then regroup and think about why you lost. And in terms of evangelicals, George, there's a lot of evidence that many of them are no longer very religious, that they no longer really go to church very much, that they have a larger vision of life and of salvation and good versus bad and so on. And you have to try to understand that and figure out a way to sit down and talk to each other. That would be my main point.
Yeah. Let me see here this last statement here. They all like this. And Donald Trump delivered a conservative Supreme Court in pushback against a gay marriage, transgender invasion by African and Latin American migrants, and other evil. It's extraordinary election season. Fasten your seatbelt. And of course, this again is from the Substack, Steffen's Substack. Go there and check this out. Now, this is along what you're talking about as far as fair play is concerned and the situation. And this, I love this. I don't know if people can see this on screen well enough, but this is the scooter. How bad our political situation in America has become. This scooter was once a fine way to get to school or work. Look at it now, abandoned next to trash bins on a side street of a vacation town. Are we as a nation going to end up beaten and broken like this? And is going to happen if we continue on the course that we're on? Let me see here. I'll bring that up on screen, Doc. And anything else you want to say about that? I mean, look at that scooter. My God.
Well, I mean, my point there was, and I also have a picture of a decrepit house that is falling apart and hasn't been cared for. Politics is like a lot of things. You have to cultivate it. You have to weed it and water it and fertilize it and caress it and make sure that it works well. You can't take it for granted. You cannot just accept, what's going on and let it rot away. And I think we have not been doing a great job, basically cultivating the garden of politics. And we need to go back and make sure we have it so it's working well, that people understand the rules and know how to participate and try to participate well. I mean, that's all there is to it.
All right, let's get back into the Iowa caucuses here because we're about half over already in this show. The de facto candidate with the Democrats is Joe Biden, although I'm told all the time that it's not settled, that the Democrats may jump ship here and join someone else when it becomes increasingly apparent that Trump is going to swamp the boat. I don't know if that's true or not. They're talking about the guy out in California, Newsom. I've even heard some talk about the governor of Illinois that I'm not that familiar with. But Matt Taibbi was on the back on the trail here in Iowa, and pay attention to what Taibbi writes about, because he was one of the very few people in 2016 that was reporting on what Trump was doing and saying, hey, this guy can win. I've been going to his rallies and I'm hearing what he's saying, and I'm seeing the size of the crowds and the types of crowds that this guy is drawing, and he is the real deal. Of course, he was a correspondent for the Rolling Stone. People weren't paying attention to him back then, but this is what he's talking about now. And this gets to the comedic aspect of this that I talked about. Donald Trump, America's comic, as lawsuits, indictments, and ballot challenges mount, a defiant Donald Trump tells America he'll be here all week. Now, this is up in Sioux Center. This isn't a Trump appearance up there. That is Stephen King country. I don't want to speak disparagingly about my fellow Iowa residents, but you hear me talk all the time on the show about the fact that we're drinking degraded pig manure. I think the people up there have had more than their share. Sioux Center, Iowa, Dateline. Taibbi writes, Donald Trump is feeling good when he moves into triumph the insult comic president mode early in his speech in Iowa Friday. This was just this past Friday. 10 days before Americans officially start voting for the man, Trump was a violin short of Henny Youngman. He had everything working. On Nikki Haley, quote, bird brain, does not have what it takes. She's a globalist. She loves the globe. He contorted his mouth to an O for globe, pronouncing it like Jeff Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. On the former GOP House Speaker, remember Paul Ryan, wheelchair off a cliff? Trump asked, remember that guy? He mentioned Ryan joining the board of Fox, quipping, no wonder Fox has changed. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, for a while, the latest in the ignominious Jeb Kasich Rubio line of not Trump Republicans falsely hyped by contenders by wish casting pundits, is no longer a serious poll threat, having been displaced by Haley in recent weeks. Trump crawled up his pipe anyway. The languorous WrestleMania-style gloat over an opponent's demise has been a stump feature since Trump's first speeches. Okay, now here he gets to it. He says, for deja vu enthusiasts, we're reliving a key mathematical constant of the Trump experience, the last-minute flurry of articles about how somebody in the GOP slate really has a shot to knock him off this time. Not that it couldn't happen, but these articles tend to be written in the tone of children's letters to Santa. And some of the crazier themes, Marco Menem and his all-time favorite, are classics of bad analysis genre. Mother Jones just went with Haley surges. She's within 13 points in New Hampshire. Doc knows all about what's happening up there, or a 4, according to some. Newsweek said Haley is hot on Trump's heels, while the New York Times asked, could Nikki Haley actually do it? Possible, I guess, but more than not likely. Okay, here's the chart. These are this is an aggregate graph done on the polling, Doc, and this shows Trump way at the top here. DeSantis has been trending down. Haley's been trending up a little at the bottom of the chart here. And then Ramaswamy, I know he's one of your favorites. He's kind of bouncing around at the bottom here. What do you make of the Republican GOP field for the Iowa caucus? I mean, this looks to me like it's Trump's to lose. Like he's kind of a hands down guy here. What do you think?
Well, what and folks watching this and listening to this know, losing the Iowa caucuses doesn't mean anything. I mean, winning means coming in number one? No, because in the past, people who came in number one, and I already mentioned them, went on and didn't get the nomination. And people who came in number one and got the nomination in Iowa may have gone on to lose. So in Iowa, you come in first on caucus night, that's fine. But if you came in second with pretty good numbers and went on to New Hampshire and did well, and then went on to Super Tuesday and did well, and then went on from Super Tuesday to get delegates in all the other states that are still up for grabs, because, this is a country of not only 50 states, but also territories. And so, in some case, these nominations don't finalize in terms of numbers of delegates that a candidate has collected to go to the national convention until Puerto Rico and Guam, which is in the summer, just before the national convention. So I am so frustrated with hearing all this BS about winning the Iowa caucuses. You know, winning the Iowa caucuses means getting a lot of publicity, doing well, first, second, third. You might even be fourth or fifth, and that's still fine, because Iowa does not choose the candidate of the party running for president. Iowa is just a start, and Iowa gives them a voice, and it winnows the field and eliminates a lot of people who tried to run and didn't have what it took, and they drop out. And the Republican Party has already winnowed the field tremendously. I did a little research for you here. 8 Republicans were eliminated by Iowa. They thought they might run, and they went, oh, no, this isn't going to work, including the mayor of Miami. 3 of them were diminished by the Iowa process: Ramaswamy, Asa Hutchinson, and Chris Christie. And so Iowa has already done its job. And I do not talk about winning the Iowa caucuses ever. I don't talk about winning the Iowa caucuses. I talk about doing well in the Iowa caucuses. And people are making fun of some of the candidates who are out there still fighting, like Nikki Haley. If you look at the latest poll in New Hampshire, which I looked at yesterday, if that poll is anywhere close to correct, Nikki Haley has surged in New Hampshire pretty high behind Donald Trump. And I think that the Trump campaign is really worried about her. If she does well, if she comes in third, but you know, not way at the low end in the Iowa caucuses on Monday, she goes to New Hampshire, that can give her a bump. And in fact, the poll in New Hampshire may give her a bump in Iowa, because people are saying, look, this is not about, you know, who we like and how wonderful this would be to have Donald Trump be the candidate. It's about, can Donald Trump win the election in November? Or is all the fun stuff, all the entertainment, all the lawsuits, all the things that he says that are controversial to a lot of people, you know, including the question of whether a president can order, you know, the military to kill his opponent, and is that covered by presidential, you know, power or not? You know, those things for a lot of people just don't sound like they are very helpful for November. I don't know. I may be wrong. I agree with you. Donald Trump is way ahead in the polls. There's no question about it. You know, that's because Republicans know who he is. They, in some cases, think that he is a counterbalance to the sort of woke Democrats, you know, who base all their policies on all kinds of things having to do with, you know, affirmative action and things like that. But it could be that after the Iowa caucuses on Monday, it still is an interesting race for nomination in the Republican Party. I don't think the Democrats are going to have much. I think people are writing in some names in New Hampshire in the primary ballots, but and it could be interesting for, you know, a while. It doesn't end in Iowa, and it doesn't end in New Hampshire, and it doesn't even end on Super Tuesday, because there are a lot of states that have very late primaries. And if you blow it in some of the places before, and then suddenly people back out in, you know, Podunk, you know, Oregon or wherever, say, wait a minute, you know, he's not doing so well. Maybe I'm going to support somebody else. It can still happen. So I'm excited about it. It's democracy at work. People are going to participate, and the media are, for the most part, pretty dumb, to be honest with you. I do a lot of media. I wish you had shown, and we're going to ask our friends out there to read the article in the South Korean newspaper that I posted. If you read Korean, you'll love it. I translated about one paragraph of that article on Iowa and on the American elections but the Korean language is so beautiful. I look at it just to see all those wonderful ways that Koreans use their particular alphabet. And there is a lot of interest in politics, and let's say that it's going to continue. Iowa is not going to seal the fate of anybody. It's just going to be one of many, many, many moments when people have a chance to vote, and it's going to, hopefully it'll go on until June, and Puerto Rico and Guam and some other American island somewhere in the Pacific that I don't even know about, that's also going to have a primary. That's what I hope.
Yeah, and I respect the doc's view on this. I'm a little more jaded than he is, particularly from the Democratic point of view about democracy at work and how these things are going to play themselves out fairly and evenly. I look at that deal with Buttigieg and that app in 2020, and then Bernie getting screwed like that, and then falling in line, endorsing the Democratic nominee. As you mentioned, even Super Tuesday doesn't guarantee who your nominee is going to be, but Obama reportedly jumped in South Carolina there and called off all the other candidates and said, nope, Joe Biden's the man, and you ain't going to get to vote for anybody else. And that's all that there is. And that's what happened in 2020. I wanted to talk more about this Trump guy. Now, I don't talk about him a lot. Taibbi, again, was up in State Center. I don't go cover these things. Matt Taibbi did. He's been on my show. I like Matt Taibbi. He went into State Center. He got COVID covering this thing. And that's one of the reasons, another reason I'm not crazy about going to these things. But here's the old Captain Butt Crunch, as I call him, on the podium in Iowa just last Friday.
Is there anybody in this room that's not going to vote for Trump? Just out of... No, don't raise your hand. It could be dangerous stuff. They're going to say he incited an insurrection, these stupid bastards. He incited an insurrection.
Yeah, okay, so there's Donald Trump telling anybody that's watching MSNBC, which is wall-to-wall January 6th and all that. I mean, he's talking to you folks. That's what he's talking about there. And I wanted to bring this up on screen too. Again, I wanted to get the doc's reaction to this because to me, I don't know. I shake my head at this Trump phenomenon. I just don't get it in a lot of respects. But here is a photo that Taibbi took, I think, on his phone. There in State Center. And I look at these shirts and what these people are wearing here. Now, again, that is kind of hard to see. And let me see if I can bring it up on full screen.
Trump won.
So people, Trump won. This one on the lower right says, they know it, I know it, you know it. No, what? Trump won. I've circled here. I've circled this in the center of the image here, this gray-haired woman in the back here, USA. Again, I don't know how Trump is played this way. This is a guy that was a prototypical draft dodger. I mean, he's about as patriotic as no one. I've got this diagonal circle here. Doc, you're old enough to remember this. I don't know if this bothers you or not. Hell, I don't know if anybody even notices anymore or not. But people that wear the American flag, when I was a kid, they said, yeah, you don't ever do that. That's desecrating the flag. And that's one thing. I get it if you're a draft protester or something. But if you're at a Trump rally and you're supposedly supporting this ultra patriotic United States and this candidate Trump and that type of thing, they can't even begin the thing without standing there with their hands on their heart like this guy with his Trump hat over his heart without saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and you're wearing the flag as clothing. I don't know, maybe I'm just being too old school here, but I don't know, Doc. What do you make of all that?
You're a grumpy old man.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
The American flag is to be worn, used, flown wherever you want, however you want. I mean, the whole idea, that the flag should only be flown on certain days and in certain ways is, I think.
No, I agree with that. I'm just talking about in context with the audience, those people that are purporting to be ultra conservative, wanting to go back to the 1930s and the way that we used to do things in this country. Well, back then, your compatriots didn't used to wear the American flag. Hell, I saw Jim Earl. He said we ought to just bury the flag instead of flying at half mast all the time, which it is. No, I'm with you on that. I mean, I get that. Yeah.
I mean, and we're used to that. We're in a performance political era where people
Yeah.
have all kinds of stuff that they wear. Have you ever been to a political convention and seen people? As I said, I have, and people wear the flag, on their hats and ties that are the American flag, and socks that are the American flag, and it's patriotism and so on. And that's just, I think, where we are. And things have changed. Donald Trump is able to, I think, inspire people because they don't like the opposite. They are worried about, and frankly, when you look at American public opinion and focus groups, it's not just evangelicals and supporters of Trump who are worried about massive immigration, uncontrolled, flooding the country, and for a whole variety of reasons, putting pressure on all kinds of things in this country. We cannot have tens of thousands of people flooding the country without any regular process. And unless the Democrats realize that, and realize that it's including Democrats who think that we need border security, then Democrats are going to lose and shrink. People are worried. People are worried about cultural overcoming American values. I mean, if you have people who believe in certain principles that are not compatible with, let's say, American principles about the relationships of people and people's rights and things like that, and they come in sufficient numbers, you can have democracy at least weaken some, because those folks are not going to necessarily agree with what we think is, the American right to freedom of speech and association and personal rights and so on. That it's not just the United States, George. I have a lot of family in Germany, and I communicate with them regularly. The Europeans are horribly worried about massive, uncontrolled migration, especially from the Middle East and Africa, flooding their countries and overwhelming them. And in recent years, the Europeans have passed much, much more strict immigration laws. There's a thing called the Schengen Agreement. The Schengen Agreement is an agreement among Europeans that all the countries will respect whatever happens in another country. So if some person from Africa is allowed into Italy, they can now go to Germany, they can go to Sweden, and go to Holland and wherever, because they're part of the Schengen Agreement. Well, the Europeans are re-examining all of that because the world is overwhelmed with climate change, terrible weather, crop failures, politically horrible regimes, poverty, and they're leaving their countries. And did you know that because the Europeans have clamped down so hard on migration and immigration, a lot of migrants from Africa are now coming to the US and coming to the Mexican border because they want to get out of there. So this is not something that Democrats should dismiss and say, well, that's just a bunch of right-wing Republicans. It's not. It's not. It's a serious, serious problem, and we need to resolve it.
Yeah, let me. I mentioned that I wanted to get comments in here and questions from our viewers, and of course, every time you mention Trump, you're going to get folks going. Mary Knox says it's funny. I follow a lot of hardcore Democrats that gripe nonstop about Donald. It gets gross. They really fear him, so the rest of us are supposed to fall in line. I cannot, says Mary. I don't like him, but except for Roe v. Wade, he really made no dramatic change. Well, he did some things that I certainly don't agree with. Now, dramatic change, but of course, Julian Assange might be the top of the list. And really what she's talking about there is Trump talks a good game. He's a big blabbermouth. And maybe that's why a lot of the Republican oligarchy, the old line Republicans, don't like him, because he doesn't do what they want him to do. Here's what. Get this. This is from the state center speech. I mean, a lot of this stuff is head snap. I mean, it'll make your jaw drop. Listen to Trump here.
With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government.
God, this is a guy that put Joe Bolton, the death walrus, in a position of power. Mike Pompeo. My God, I've got a clip with Pompeo that I play all the time. He was the Secretary of State. He indicted Julian Assange, a journalist, on espionage charges. He's in Belmarsh awaiting extradition now, still under the Joe Biden administration. Here, this is Trump. He's going to get rid of the deep state. Here's the guy that was the Secretary of State under Donald Trump.
When I was a cadet, what's the cadet motto at West Point? You will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. I was the CIA director. We lied, we cheated, we stole. It was like we had entire training courses. It reminds you of the glory of the American experiment.
I got wound up, said Secretary of State. I should have said CIA director. I mean, he's being funny, but really, that's kind of like what we're talking about here with Trump and a lot of this stuff. It ain't funny. These politics, as Doc says, I mean, you may not like it, but it likes you. This is serious business, and we're about to find out, I think, how serious in a very short time, Doc.
Well, the problem is that it has elevated tension and hostility to a level that I have not seen in all my entire life of following and studying and talking about American politics. And the hostility has produced people basically threatening or attacking election officials, judges, school teachers, and the level of tension, I think, is too high. And my article, I have several articles coming out in South Korean newspapers. I have an article coming out in the largest newspaper in Switzerland. The Economist just interviewed me. I have a lot of places where I'm selling this gospel is if you raise the level of tension and you make people think that they should hate each other, the end result is going to be they're going to hate each other and they're going to take matters into their own hands. And they're going to do what's going on right now in Ecuador, which is Ecuador is falling apart. The one group just invaded a television station with hand grenades and guns and threatened the people there, and were sending their message. If you let tensions get too high on all kinds of different issues, you are going to deteriorate your political system, where elections and Congress and state legislatures no longer are the place where problems are solved. You're going to pour it into the streets, and then what happens is things get really ugly. I mean, I carried a gun since I was a kid when I grew up in Colombia, because Colombia was a political nightmare, one of the highest death rates in the world per capita, between who? Liberals and conservatives. The Partido Liberal and the Partido Conservador were at each other with violence down to every little village. And it was an unbelievably dangerous situation. It was not only political violence, because when politics disintegrates, then criminals begin to take over. And my family and I and everybody we knew always had firearms, had steel grates on the windows of their homes and farms. And we had a ranch up in the Andes Mountains near Cali, where I was born. We were always on the lookout. We were always worried. I never had to shoot anybody, thankfully, but we always were ready to protect ourselves because there was violence all around us. I don't want us going there. And we are slowly, I think, moving in a direction where things can get violent. And people who think that they control the violence, it's us, we're going to take care of those deep state people and all of those people. No, those people are going to get armed and they're going to take care of you as well. Violence is a two-way street. It's very rarely, unless you're a total dictator like North Korea, where you are in control of the violence. If the violence comes up from the grassroots, everybody gets hurt. And so we don't want to go there. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, and we're just about at the top of the hour here. We're going to turn these things into quick hitters here. I wanted to get to the doc on this one in particular, talking about the Republican candidates, because there's a lot of them. They're still running. Trump's not de facto like Biden is. But the Des Moines Register put a plug in for the hometown paper here. They're doing a nice little summary on some of the top issues of the day. And, of course, with Podcast by George, my top issues are always climate, war, and healthcare. And as I started off by saying, the 2020 world that we live in, we could be dead in 20 minutes from an accidental or purposeful nuclear strike. Don't know if that's going to happen, but what I do think is going to happen is climate is going to kill millions of us, maybe hell, billions of us in the next 20 years. So I'm a big climate guy. Here's the oversight, the summary from the Des Moines Register, where Republican presidential candidates stand on climate change. Ryan Binkley, he's for developing new technologies. Okay, climate scientists have told us, I mean, they're almost unanimous in this. It ain't happening. Not in the time that we have remaining. New technologies, we are not going to develop and solve our way out of this. But that's what Binkley says. Chris Christie, the doc mentioned him. The highlighting here is mine, of course. However, he's called for more U.S. oil production. Oh, good. Fail. Ron DeSantis, instead of supporting oil and gas exploration and development, that's what he's doing. That's his solution to climate. He wants to support oil and gas exploration and development. Nikki Haley, out on the campaign trail, has been U.S. energy independent. She believes that we should be producing and generating our own energy by drill, baby, drill in the country under the control of the United States. Okay, got fail. Asa Hutchinson, this guy out of Arkansas, he supports the fossil fuel industry. Fail. Vivek Ramaswamy, the climate change agenda is a hoax. This guy's on record saying that it's a hoax. Who else is? Probably this guy. Trump opposes most climate change legislation. Again, that's just the top of the list for me, Doc. Climate, war, and healthcare. But with the Republicans and with their prospective voters, maybe that's not even close to the top of the list. I know you agree with that.
Well, yeah, of course, climate and energy are enormous topics. I will say you're just too young to remember this, but I remember when I was a kid, automobiles and trucks and trains and airplanes produced enormous amounts of emissions. And we began to try to correct that with technology. You know, we made engines more efficient. We created all kinds of devices that control those emissions. And why shouldn't there be a breakthrough in basically greatly reducing the emissions that we are currently still experiencing? I think, you know, that's a possibility. You should also remember that when you suddenly have a heart attack, God forbid, you probably won't because you're an athlete, and so you're in fantastic shape and will never have a heart attack. But if you were to have one and you call the ambulance, it's not going to be a solar ambulance, and it's not going to be an ambulance that is running probably on an electric battery. Maybe it is, but if it's an electric battery, people are so weird. They forget, where is the electricity made? That is not something that comes down from nature automatically. It's made at a power plant somewhere far away that may be using gas and maybe using, diesel and other energy. So you're just shifting where the emissions are occurring. And so we are faced with a challenge on that. In terms of war, what is it good for? Probably, whatever you need to do to protect yourself, because sometimes you don't start the war. When you look at what's going on around the world, we don't want to get ourselves involved in all these conflicts that are going on in different places, because we realize, I think now, we cannot control how women are treated in Afghanistan. We can't. We just can't. They are not going to buy our view that girls should be going to school, that women should be allowed to drive cars, that women should not have to cover themselves with clothing to basically cover their faces. And so what are we going to do? We need to say, well, countries need to basically deal with their problems, and we'll try to sort of keep things a little bit stable. But getting involved in wars all over the place is just, it's a bad idea. Deterrence is better. We have enough problems in this country. I mean, our crime problems are increasing Our social distance between incomes is growing, which leads to a lot of violence. We don't have enough spent on schools, on public health, on mental health, you don't have to have gun control by taking away people's guns. You can have smart policies that will teach people how to be more responsible with guns, and parents should not leave guns laying around on their coffee table so that their kids can grab them and take them to school. I mean, that's simple, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't that simple? I had a lot of guns. I don't have a lot of them now. They're locked up. They're not so locked up that I can't reach them in case somebody tries to come and kill me, but they're not laying around on the coffee table. And I wouldn't give young children guns to take to school. And so we need to address things that will make us safer without this whole idea of, well, the Democrats are going to take away all your guns, because that doesn't fly very well with a lot of people. Even some Democrats that I know, who like to hunt and stuff like that. So we are facing problems that could be resolved by more intelligent politics and more intelligence in the policy-making process. And I'm hoping that we will move in that direction.
Well, I'm all for intelligence and compassion. And we're out of time. I want to bring this up on screen because I promised one of the most loyal listeners to Podcast by George that I would get your opinion on this, because there's a lot of talk of this. You've mentioned it before, and it is these guys. It is the no labels movement.
Right.
And I don't know, Doc, I just look at those guys and I think, hell, those are just Republicans. Those are just people that don't like Donald Trump. They want to cut the taxes on the rich. They want to do more war. They want to deregulate. They want to punch down. And they floated the idea of their nominee or candidate being this Joe Manchin guy as an example. Do you have any read or take, again, for this loyal listener on the no labels movement?
Yeah, it's fine. It's wonderful. We need more political parties, and Americans need more choice. We need a lot of cereal on the shelf in the grocery store, because not everybody likes Cheerios like I do. So, the more the better, and let 1,000 blossoms bloom in terms of political choices. That's all I have to say. And if people like what these candidates are basically advocating and have a way to support them, I mean, these people are probably not going to get on the ballot in a lot of states because they won't have enough support. There's usually a minimum amount of support that you have to have either in the polls or numbers of people contributing to you and so on. And so we got a lot of people running. We always have a lot of people, George, you know this. We always have a lot of different political groups and parties running. Most of them are small, they're marginal, they appeal to a small number of people. They normally are not even mentioned by the media, because it's very difficult for anyone except Democrats and Republicans to win elections in the United States, even local elections, which should be easier. Why? Because the parties have set up a system that favors them in terms of who is legitimate, and because voters, often are not that attracted to some of these groups. So let it happen. There are a lot of people who are running different campaigns. I think Cornel West is probably.
He's been on my show. Yeah.
He's the most risky, I think, for Biden, because if African Americans like him and support him, if he gets on the ballot in enough states, it could suck away votes. Jill Stein, again, running as a Green Party candidate, also dangerous because it's environmentalists like yourself and progressives who are voted for her last time and cost Hillary Clinton the election in 3 states. 3 states, Jill Stein sucked away enough votes that Donald Trump won and got the Electoral College votes. And that's mathematics. That's not Steffen Schmidt making up stuff. So third parties, can do that. They did it to Al Gore in Florida, if you remember. He lost there because a lot of people supported a third party candidate there. Ralph Nader whom I know quite well, and is a lovely guy, and wrote a book about how dangerous American cars are in terms of the rear end gasoline tank exploding. But it didn't do a lot of good for the end result for Democrats. And this time around, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running is an interesting case, because some people are saying, oh my God, it's going to hurt the Democrats. A lot of people are saying, no, it's going to hurt the Republicans, because, you know, he's an anti-vaxxer and so on. So there's a lot of excitement and speculation about all the third parties that are popping up like mushrooms in the spring out there. And we just have to take it with a grain of salt and say that if you're in favor of diversity, you'd better be in favor of Manchin running and others running, because that's political diversity. And if it was Europe, you would have a lot of those. And if it was Israel, you'd have even more. And they would totally paralyze the government if they got elected, because Israel has the most horrible system where tiny little parties can dominate the Knesset and dominate the majority, which elects the prime minister. So the two-party system is okay in certain ways because it provides cohesion. It's, you know, a two-party system. If you had 12 parties in Congress, man, you can imagine it's bad enough as it is.
Doc, we're way over time here. I just look at the clock. It's we're coming up on an hour and 7 minutes.
All right.
Yeah,
Fine.
but I mean, you you deserve the forum, man. There's no doubt about that. Anything you want to say in closing here as we wrap up this edition?
Just stay warm.
Yeah, stay warm and happy. Yeah, that's
maybe 3 or 4 layers. That's all.
Yeah, that's good advice, Doc. Thanks again. We'll circle back here again very shortly, maybe post caucus, and see what happens. Yeah, folks, I hope you like seeing the Doc on here. Dr. Steffen W. Schmidt, Dr. Politics, known worldwide. We're lucky to have him on Podcast by George. And if you like seeing him here and these long form discussions, this free for all like we just had, go to podcastbygeorge.com and pick a platform. You can choose YouTube, you can choose Facebook to see the video live streams. And then if you just want to listen to it in audio, you can do that as well, because the link for iTunes, little icon, the badge for Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, places like that, that's also at podcastbygeorge.com. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.